podcast where truth moves faster than a Holstein calf. No waiting on some pretty page. We're charting your ground in the digital age. From genomic codes to row-out facts, we cut through the noise, no holding back. Not your daddy's dairy news tonight. We're sparking debates with every insight. The ring's not where the real fight's at. It's in the data, in the channel chat. From pasture to processor to your morning cup, we're raising the stakes. Try and get ahead of herd. Yeah! Where the future's more than just a word. Ahead of herd. Come on! The bullvine's calling, let your voice be heard.
Welcome to the Bullvine Podcast, where we challenge conventional dairy wisdom and deliver the cutting-edge insights that separate industry leaders from the competition. I'm your host, bringing you the bold analysis and actionable intelligence that progressive dairy professionals depend on. Today's episode tackles one of the most expensive myths in modern dairy farming, the belief that heat stress only matters at 80 degrees Fahrenheit. New research reveals this outdated thinking is costing the industry $245 million annually, while elite operations are weaponizing heat-tolerant genetics and precision cooling to protect $700 per cow every summer. We're diving deep into the uncomfortable truth about how genetic selection for production has created thermal disasters, why small farms are being systematically eliminated by heat stress costs, and how the slick gene and genomic breeding values are revolutionizing thermal management. If you're tired of watching profits evaporate with every heat wave while your breeding company sells you genetic improvements that can't handle modern climate realities, this episode will change how you think about summer management forever. Let's get started.
Okay, let's unpack this. You shared some incredibly insightful material with us today, and we're going to dive deep into a Bullvine article that takes a sharp look at heat stress in dairy cattle.
Sounds good. It's a topic that definitely warrants a closer look.
Yeah, because on the surface, heat stress might sound, pretty straightforward. Cows get hot, right? We see them panting on a sweltering summer day.
Sure, that's the obvious part.
But the core premise of this Bullvine article is actually quite surprising. It challenges a threshold that I think a lot of people in the industry have kind of taken as gospel for years. It's not just about cows being uncomfortable when we feel hot. It's far more insidious than that.
Exactly. This Bullvine article doesn't just scratch the surface. It takes a deep look at the underlying science, the stark economics, the complexities of genetics, and the potential of technology when it comes to managing heat stress.
It's really pulling all those threads together.
Yeah, it's a fantastic resource, really helping you cut through the noise and understand what's truly happening on your farm, and why those seemingly comfortable days can be costing you big time.
And the stakes, according to this Bullvine article, are incredibly high. We're not just talking about a little dip in milk production during a heat wave.
Oh, not at all. This is about significant quantifiable losses.
Both immediate, like in the tank.
Right. Milk flow components.
But also long-term.
Yeah.
Things like impacting reproductive performance and the very genetic potential you've invested so much in.
That's right. The article really drives home the point that in today's environment, and certainly looking forward, heat stress management isn't just, a good practice. It's becoming a major differentiator.
A differentiator? How so?
Well, there are operations out there that are truly mastering this. They're implementing comprehensive strategies that mitigate losses and even, as the article suggests, find ways to turn summer,
which is usually a loss period.
Exactly. Turn it from a period of decreased profitability into an opportunity for relative gain compared to others who aren't managing it well.
So, while some are losing ground, others are actually potentially gaining an edge.
That's the picture it paints. Right. Meanwhile, operations that stick to outdated approaches are being left behind, facing compounding damage and, frankly, increasing competitive pressure.
Okay, so our mission today is to take this Bullvine article, this piece of research you've provided, and really dig into its core insights.
Yeah, pull out those key nuggets.
So you can be truly well-informed, challenge some maybe long-held assumptions, and maybe look at your own heat stress management strategies or lack thereof a little differently. Let's dive in.
Let's do it.
All right, so the first and perhaps most impactful thing this Bullvine article really pushes back against is what it calls the 80-degree ever heat stress myth.
Ah, yes, the big one.
For years, you've probably heard or assumed that you only really need to start worrying about heat stress when the temperature hits 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Or maybe when the THI, the temperature humidity index, climbs past 80.
That's been the standard advice for a long time.
But the source argues very strongly that waiting until then is, well, it calls it a costly deception. It's far too late by then.
It absolutely does, and this is where the scientific research cited in the article is so critical. It points out that the widely accepted 80-degree but THI threshold is simply inaccurate for modern high-producing dairy breeds.
Inaccurate. So what is the real number then?
The true threshold for thermal stress in these animals starts much, much lower. The research indicates that significant measurable performance degradation begins at a temperature-humidity index of just 68 degrees Fahrenheit.
68 degrees THI. Wait a second. 68, that feels comfortable to me.
Yeah.
That's like a nice spring day, maybe a mild fall afternoon. You'd be walking around in a light jacket, or maybe even a t-shirt, feeling perfectly fine.
Precisely. And that's the deceptive part the article highlights. What feels comfortable to you, a human,
Right, we're different.
who generates far less metabolic heat and has different physiological cooling mechanisms, is actually where the stress begins for a cow bred for extreme productivity.
Wow.
The article really emphasizes this stark contrast between how we perceive thermal comfort and what the science reveals about the biological reality for these highly productive animals.
So the industry standard messaging, it just hasn't caught up.
It seems it's lagged significantly behind the scientific understanding, yeah.
Okay, but why? Why is this happening at such a seemingly low temperature and humidity level for the cows? The article digs into the reason, doesn't it? It's tied to how we've bred them.
Yes, that's a key point the article makes, and it's a bit of a double-edged sword, really.
Oh, so?
Well, modern dairy breeds, particularly Holsteins, have undergone incredibly intensive genetic selection over the past 50-plus years.
Right, all focused on milk.
Primarily focused on boosting milk production to, unprecedented levels. This selection pressure has resulted in cows with significantly higher metabolic rates and a much higher feed intake compared to their ancestors.
Which is great for yield, obviously.
Fantastic for yield, but those physiological processes involved in converting feed into milk generate a tremendous amount of internal heat, what scientists call endogenous heat.
Endogenous heat, okay, internal heat.
So even at relatively mild ambient temperatures and humidity levels, these cows are essentially fighting their own internal furnace.
So it's not just the sun beating down, it's the heat they're creating inside just by doing their job, by being so productive.
Exactly. The very efficiency we've bred into them to produce milk makes them more susceptible to heat stress, starting much sooner than that traditional outdated 80-degree hour mark.
They're like little thermal powerhouses.
That's a good way to put it. And that massive amount of metabolic heat needs to dissipate. As the THI rises, even slightly from 68 degrees Celsius, their ability to shed that internal heat becomes compromised.
And that leads to measurable stress.
Long before they start outwardly panting or seeking shade intensely, yes. The article argues that the genetic progress for production has inadvertently engineered a significant thermal vulnerability.
Okay, so the myth is busted. 68 degrees FTHI is the real threshold where the damage starts accumulating. Now let's talk about the scale of that damage. The economic impact presented in this bovine article, citing a University of Illinois study, is, wow, it's pretty staggering.
It really is. It should make anyone in the dairy business sit up and pay attention.
And the study itself sounds massive.
It is remarkably comprehensive. They analyzed over 56 million individual cow production records.
56 million.
From 18,000 dairy farms across the United States. So this isn't just a small sample, it's a huge data set.
Painting a really clear picture then.
An alarming picture, yeah, of the scale of the problem across the industry.
And the numbers. When you look at the industry level, what are we talking about?
They are truly eye-watering. The cumulative loss across the U.S. dairy industry over just a 5-year period, directly attributable to heat stress, was approximately 1.4 billion pounds of milk.
1.4 billion pounds.
Wow, think about that. 1.4 billion pounds. And when you translate that into lost revenue for the industry, a staggering $245 million.
$245 million. It's almost hard to grasp that number on an industry scale. It feels, abstract.
It does feel abstract, but the article does an excellent job of bringing this down to the farm level, doesn't it?
Yeah, it connects it right to your operation.
Framing this not just as abstract industry losses, but as a direct, tangible hit to your milk check, your bottom line.
How does it do that? What's the example?
Absolutely. It translates that massive industry loss into terms that resonate directly with a farm's profitability. The article uses the example of a hypothetical 500-cow operation.
Okay, 500 cows. Pretty standard size for many.
Right. And it calculates that if that farm experiences just 30 days of inadequate heat management at that lower 70-degree FTHI threshold.
So not even the old 80 myth, just barely over that 68 mark we talked about.
Exactly, just slightly above the 68 degrees starting point. That farm could lose 150,000 pounds of milk annually.
150,000 pounds of milk for a 500-cow herd over just 30 days of stress around that 70-degree FTHI mark. That is a significant amount of milk potential just vanishing.
Really is.
And the article puts a very concrete dollar figure on that loss, too, at current pricing.
Based on typical pricing, that 150,000 pounds of lost milk translates directly to approximately $31,650 in lost revenue for that single 500-cow farm.
Over $30,000.
Each year. And the article makes a powerful point here that really challenges common farm economics.
What's the challenge?
It cleverly highlights that $31,650 is often enough to fund significant, impactful infrastructure improvements on that very farm.
Like what? Fans.
Sprinklers.
Yeah, things like installing advanced fan and sprinkler systems or upgrading existing ones, the very improvements that many operations are resistant to making, citing capital costs.
The can't afford it argument. Right, yet they are potentially losing that much or even more by not making those investments.
Wow, that's a powerful reframing. It flips the script.
It really does.
It transforms the perceived cost of investment into the very real cost of inaction. You're losing that money anyway, but you're not getting the asset that could prevent future losses.
Precisely.
And the article makes it abundantly clear that this $31,650 loss is just the immediate, direct milk loss, which leads us into the longer-term stuff, right? The compounding damage heat stress inflicts.
Right. The impact of heat stress is cumulative and far-reaching. It's not confined to just the days or weeks the cow is visibly feeling the heat and her milk check dips.
There's more going on under the surface.
There are physiological and behavioral effects that create ripple effects throughout her current lactation, significantly impacting her reproductive cycle, her health and longevity, and critically, as we'll discuss later, even impacting the performance of her future offspring.
Okay, let's get into those physiological impacts then. The article goes beyond just saying cows pant more. It details precisely how heat stress is fundamentally disrupting their internal systems.
Yes, the source material provides a detailed look at several key physiological responses that begin at these lower THI thresholds.
So beyond just drinking more and eating less.
Yeah, beyond the obvious behavioral changes like increased water intake and reduced dry matter intake, which, as you can imagine, immediately impact performance by reducing nutrient uptake.
Sure, less fuel in, less milk out.
The article mentions complex internal disruptions, things like electrolyte imbalances, significant acid-base disruptions.
Acid base, like pH level.
Exactly. Specifically, respiratory alkalosis, often accompanied by metabolic acidosis, and disturbances in sodium homeostasis.
Okay, electrolyte imbalances, acid-base disruptions, respiratory alkalosis with metabolic acidosis, disturbances in sodium homeostasis. That sounds pretty technical.
It is technical, yeah.
For someone who isn't a physiologist, what does that mean in practical terms for the cow? How do these translate into a sick, less productive animal?
That's a crucial question, and the article implies these are the core mechanisms of harm. Let's try to break them down slightly, in simple terms. Electrolyte imbalances, for instance.
Okay.
The cow is losing critical minerals like potassium and sodium as she tries to cool herself, often through sweating or increased respiration.
And those minerals are important.
Vital for nerve function, muscle contractions, maintaining hydration. Losing them impairs her ability to function properly, affects her appetite, and contributes to fatigue.
Okay, that makes sense. What about the acid-base disruption? That sounded complicated. Respiratory alkalosis, metabolic acidosis.
Yeah, that one's particularly damaging. When a cow pants heavily to try and cool down, she's rapidly expelling carbon dioxide.
Okay.
This excessive CO2 loss leads to a condition called respiratory alkalosis, which means her blood pH becomes too alkaline, too high. Her body then tries to compensate, often leading to metabolic acidosis. This huge disruption to her blood's pH balance messes with virtually every metabolic process in her body.
How so? What does it affect?
It impairs nutrient uptake from the gut. It can contribute to issues like laminitis. It suppresses her immune system, making her more vulnerable to disease.
So secondary infections become more likely.
Exactly. And it fundamentally reduces her feed efficiency. She just can't get as much energy and protein out of the feed she does manage to eat.
Wow. And the sodium homeostasis thing.
That ties into this. Sodium is critical for maintaining fluid balance and is closely linked to potassium and chloride balance. When this system is disrupted by heat stress, it exacerbates hydration problems and can further impair cellular functions and overall metabolic efficiency.
So taken together, these aren't just minor discomforts. This is like a systemic breakdown.
It is a breakdown of the cow's internal balance, affecting everything from her metabolism and immune system to her gut function and even her foot health. This is the how behind the lost milk and increased health issues we see.
Okay, that paints a much clearer picture of the internal damage.
Exactly. The article makes it clear these physiological responses are the mechanisms by which heat stress directly harms the cow's health, severely compromises her welfare, and critically undermines her ability to produce milk efficiently and reproduce successfully.
The cascade effect.
Starting with that slightly elevated THI, and leading to widespread internal dysfunction.
Now, the article pivots to something a bit uncomfortable, something that challenges the industry narrative around genetic progress.
Yes. This is where it asks some difficult questions.
It suggests that the very intensive genetic selection programs we've celebrated might have unintended consequences when it comes to heat tolerance.
It presents the uncomfortable truth that the past decades of intensive genetic selection focused almost singularly on maximizing milk production and related traits.
Udder depth, somatic cell score, things like that?
Right. That focus has, in a significant way, engineered thermal vulnerability into our modern dairy herds.
So we bred for more and more milk, higher peaks, and in doing so, we inadvertently made the animals less able to cope with heat. It's like we optimized for output in a perfect air-conditioned environment, maybe.
That's essentially the tension the article discusses. By selecting so heavily for traits associated with high metabolic activity and high feed intake,
Which we just said produces all that internal heat.
precisely, we've created cows that generate a massive amount of internal heat. The focus was on the numerator, the milk yield, without fully accounting for the denominator.
The cow's ability to actually handle the heat she produces to make that milk.
Exactly. Handle it under real-world environmental conditions. The article points out that historically, major breeding companies haven't prominently featured heat tolerance or thermoregulation traits in their promotional materials or breeding indexes.
Even while they're pushing for higher and higher production numbers.
Right, numbers that inherently load the cow's thermal regulation system.
And the article puts a challenging question directly to you, the listener, doesn't it? To anyone making breeding decisions.
It does. It asks, are you breeding for production at the expense of thermal resilience?
It highlights that breeding company representatives, understandably focused on selling semen from top production bulls,
They have a job to do, yeah.
often focus solely on those production numbers and indices without necessarily providing sufficient context on the animal's potential performance under environmental stress, like heat.
It forces you to consider whether your genetic strategy is fully addressing the environmental realities your cows face today.
And will increasingly face in the future with climate change.
Absolutely. Are you optimizing for peak production in a controlled, ideal environment? Or are you strategically building a herd that can thrive, not just survive, under practical farm conditions that include periods of significant heat stress?
That's a crucial distinction, a significant and somewhat unsettling question.
It is.
But the good news is the article doesn't just leave us with a problem. It also talks about how genomic selection, the same tool used to increase production, can also be part of the solution for heat tolerance.
Right. That's the flip side. The revolutionary idea presented is that genomic selection isn't just potentially the source of increased vulnerability. It can be a crucial part of the solution for building thermal resilience.
We can actually select for it.
We can identify and select for traits that help cows cope with heat, yes.
And the article mentions specific, compelling research backing this up.
Yes, it details a fascinating study published in the prestigious journal Nature.
Nature, okay. What did it find?
This research demonstrated that dairy cattle selected using genomic breeding values specifically for heat tolerance alongside production traits.
So not instead of, but alongside.
Right. Those cows had significantly less milk decline and showed reduced increases in core body temperature during simulated heat wave events compared to animals predicted to be heat susceptible based on their genomics.
So, clear scientific proof it can be done.
Clear evidence that we can genetically select for improved thermal resilience without necessarily sacrificing desired production traits entirely.
That's groundbreaking. And then it gets into perhaps the most talked about specific genetic solution right now, the SLICK gene.
The SLICK gene. Yeah, the article calls it the most dramatic single gene solution discovered so far for heat tolerance in dairy cattle.
SLICK.
Yep.
What does it do? It makes them slick.
Essentially, yes. This gene results in a short, sleek hair coat. It's derived from heat-tolerant breeds like the Carora and Senepol.
Okay, breeds adapted to hot climates.
Exactly. Crosses of Criollo and Red Pole cattle originally. And that short, sleek coat is responsible for improved thermoregulation, basically. It makes it easier for the cow to dissipate heat off her skin.
Makes sense. Less insulation. And there's specific practical research cited from LIC New Zealand on this, a major breeding company.
Yes. The Bovine article highlights key findings from 9 years of research and breeding work by LIC New Zealand, which has focused heavily on integrating the SLICK gene into their breeding program.
9 years is a serious commitment. What did they find?
Their research found that SLICK carriers, even when crossed into traditional dairy breeds, had significantly lower rumen temperatures.
Rumen temps. That's a good measure of core body temp, right?
Very accurate indicator, yes. Lower by 0.5 to 1.0 degrees C compared to their non-SLICK counterparts.
Half a degree to a full degree Celsius lower.
And crucially, this significant temperature difference was observed specifically when the THI exceeded 73, right when the heat stress is really kicking in.
That might sound like a small number, half a degree or a degree, but the article implies it's incredibly significant physiologically.
It is huge for an animal trying to manage heat load. That seemingly small difference in core body temperature translates directly into reduced physiological stress.
So they can put more energy into making milk, not just staying cool.
Exactly. Allows the animal to allocate more energy to production and health rather than solely to thermoregulation. It makes a real difference in their ability to cope. And LIC has made significant progress integrating this.
They haven't had to heavily back-cross with, low-producing, heat-tolerant breeds to get this trait, have they? That's always the worry.
No, and that's the key success the article highlights for LIC. After 9 years of breeding, they state they now have SLICK sires with breeding worth approaching that of the very best high-production dairy sires in the New Zealand industry.
Well, so top production and the SLICK gene.
And they've achieved this with minimal Senepol gene content in the resulting animals, averaging only 132nd.
Only one 30-second Senepol. That's tiny.
Very small genetic contribution from the original source breed.
So you're getting the significant heat tolerance benefit of the SLICK gene without introducing a large amount of genetics from a less productive, non-traditional dairy breed.
Yeah.
That addresses a major concern dairy producers would have.
Absolutely. The article frames this as powerful proof that you don't necessarily have to make a stark choice and sacrifice production potential for thermal resilience.
It can be integrated.
It is a trait that can be effectively integrated into high-performing genetic lines through careful selection and breeding programs. It offers a genuine path forward for building more resilient herds.
The article also mentions that SLICK isn't the only genetic solution being identified. There are other markers, too.
It does. Beyond the SLICK gene, the Bovine article refers to other validated genetic markers that are showing promise. Specifically, it mentions single nucleotide polymorphisms, or SNPs.
SNPs, okay, like tiny variations in the DNA code.
Exactly, in genes like TLR4, GRM8, and SM83.
TLR4, GRM8, SM83. What are those genes generally involved in, and how do favorable markers in them help a cow under heat stress?
Well, these genes play roles in fundamental biological processes that are disrupted by heat stress. For example, TLR4 is involved in immune responses and detecting pathogens.
And heat stress suppresses immunity, so that makes sense.
Right. Certain TLR4 variants might help modulate that response better. GRM8 is linked to brain function and metabolic regulation, both of which go haywire under heat stress. And SM83 is involved in cell growth and differentiation, processes vital for maintaining tissue health and function. The research cited indicates that cows with favorable variations, these SNPs, in these specific genes demonstrate a better ability to manage the physiological stress response.
So they're predictors.
They are predictors of both milk production potential and the ability to cope with thermal challenge in heat-stressed Holsteins.
So cows with these specific favorable markers have like an internal advantage when it gets hot.
Precisely. The research shows that heat-stressed Holstein cows carrying these favorable markers were more effective at reducing their rectal temperature and respiration rate compared to herd mates without them.
Lower temp, lower breathing rate.
By keeping their core temperature and respiratory effort lower, they were better able to maintain adequate milk production levels even when facing significant thermal challenges. So it's about having the right genetic tools to manage the internal chaos heat stress creates.
Okay, so genetics offers a powerful piece of the puzzle, giving cows the internal ability to cope better. But the bovine article makes another potentially uncomfortable point, one that circles back to that $31,000 loss example.
Yes.
Genetics isn't a silver bullet on its own, maybe, and perhaps our investment priorities on farms are a bit off.
This is where the article shifts focus and introduces another challenging reality. It argues that despite the excitement around genetic solutions, which are definitely part of the future, spending heavily on genetic testing and high GEB semen,
Especially if you're not specifically looking for heat tolerance markers.
right, with potentially uncertain outcomes regarding heat tolerance if you're not selecting for it or managing the environment, that spending is not necessarily a better investment than proven effective cooling infrastructure.
And the article uses a pretty blunt phrase here. It says, most operations manage heat stress like it's 1995. Ouch.
It's a blunt assessment, yeah, but the article uses it to make a point about how much farm-level heat abatement practices have lagged behind.
Lagged behind the science.
Both the science of heat stress and the advancements in cooling technology. Many farms are still relying on outdated fan placements, simple sprinkling systems, or maybe only reacting once cows are clearly distressed.
While at the same time, maybe spending big on genetics.
Right. Investing significant capital in genetic technologies focused on production without fully addressing the environmental conditions that will limit that genetic potential.
And the article argues the economic reality, the ROI, is much clearer for cooling.
Yes. It states emphatically that comprehensive, well-designed cooling infrastructure delivers measurable, significant, and relatively rapid returns.
Where do those returns come from? Just the milk?
It's the avoided losses, not just the immediate milk production loss, but also significant reproductive losses. Think reduced conception rates, increased embryo loss, and health losses too.
Like what kind of health losses?
Higher incidence of laminitis, mastitis, displaced abomasums, things often linked to the systemic stress of heat. The article contrasts this clearer ROI from cooling with the often uncertain outcomes of some genetic strategies when they aren't supported by the right environment. Investing in proven cooling tech provides a more predictable return because you're directly tackling the environmental stressor.
So it's not just about having more fans and water then. It's about smart, strategic cooling.
Absolutely. The article emphasizes that effective cooling isn't just about buying more equipment. It's about strategic placement, timing, and utilizing advanced techniques, what it calls precision cooling.
Not just random fans and constant sprinklers.
Right. Simply adding more fans in random locations or running sprinklers continuously isn't necessarily efficient or maximally effective.
It gives a specific detail about advanced soaking systems, right? Highlighting efficiency.
Yes, it highlights that modern advanced soaking systems can significantly reduce water usage compared to traditional methods, often by 50-70%.
50-70% less water. That's huge.
Crucial, yeah. Not just for cost and water availability, but also for managing bedding, moisture, and hygiene.
And how they achieve that efficiency?
Through a precision cycling technique. Instead of continuous sprinkling, it involves short, intense soaking periods, typically just 30-45 seconds.
Just 30-45 seconds, that's it.
Enough to thoroughly wet the cow's coat down to the skin. This is immediately followed by a much longer fan-only drying period, usually 4 to 5 minutes.
Okay, soak quick, then dry long with fans. Why is that cycling better than just keeping them wet?
The article explains the cooling comes from evaporation. By thoroughly wetting the cow and then providing strong airflow, you maximize evaporative cooling. The fan-only period allows significant evaporation to occur, carrying heat away from the cow's skin.
So the drying phase is actually where the cooling really happens.
That's the key phase for heat removal. It also allows her coat to dry somewhat before the next soak cycle. Continuous sprinkling can saturate the hair coat and the surrounding air, reducing the evaporative potential.
Making it muggy and less effective.
Exactly. It actually hinders cooling. The cycling ensures you're maximizing the cooling benefit of evaporation with minimal water use and avoiding excessive humidity buildup around the cow.
And the analysis here circles back to the core premise of the article. Waiting for visible panting to turn on the cooling means you've already lost money.
You're already behind. The article reiterates this crucial point. By the time you see a cow panting heavily, seeking shade, or dramatically reducing feed intake, the physiological disruptions we discussed earlier,
The electrolyte imbalances, the acid-base chaos.
the hormonal stress responses, they're already well underway. Production is already dropping, fertility is already compromised, and her health is already potentially impacted.
So you got to be proactive.
Effective cooling, especially with precision systems, needs to be proactive. Activated based on environmental indicators like THI hitting 68 degrees ARA or just above, not reactive based on visible symptoms.
Right.
You have to get ahead of the stress.
Okay, so genetics offers internal help. Smart cooling addresses the external environment. But the article also introduces the crucial role of technology, seeing things your eyes can't, getting an early warning.
This is where the promise of modern monitoring technology comes in. The article asks a compelling question. What if you could reliably detect thermal stress in your cows?
Before you see it.
Yeah, 12 or even 24 hours before they show any outwardly visible symptoms like panting or reduced activity.
That would be a game changer for implementing proactive cooling or other management interventions. Definitely.
It absolutely would. And the article discusses recent advances in sensor technologies that are making this possible right now.
What kind of sensors?
We're talking about non-invasive or minimally invasive wearable devices like collars or ear tags, and even internal rumen boluses that provide real-time monitoring.
Rumen boluses. Wow. Measuring from the inside out.
Exactly. These devices, combined with wireless transmission systems, can provide a constant stream of data about individual animals.
What kind of data are these technologies collecting that gives us this early warning? What are they measuring?
The source mentions several key data points: body surface temperature, respiration rate, changes in eating and drinking patterns, overall activity levels, rumination activity.
Rumen contractions.
Right, and core body temperature via those rumen boluses. These provide a window into the cow's physiological state beyond just looking at her from a distance.
And based on the research cited, which of those are considered the best early indicators? The first signs.
The article highlights body surface temperature, measured by external sensors, and respiration rate.
Why those two?
Because of their high feasibility of measurement on a large scale and their sensitivity, they react quickly to rising thermal load before other, more visible symptoms appear.
So changes in skin temp and breathing rate often happen before they stop ruminating or look obviously distressed.
That seems to be the case, yeah. They often precede drops in rumination or activity or noticeable panting.
And the real power comes from integrating this technology, right? Combining animal data with environmental data, like THI.
Yes. The article mentions combining these animal-based sensor data streams with environmental data from barn sensors using Internet of Things or IoT technologies.
IoT, connecting everything.
To create comprehensive data-driven strategies. These strategies are based on using both animal-based indicators, the cow's internal and external physiological responses, and environment-based indicators like THI, airflow, etc., together.
So you get the full picture.
Right. This integrated approach significantly increases the precision and timeliness of early heat stress detection. It allows for targeted intervention.
Like cooling just one pen that needs it.
Exactly. Maybe even triggering fans or sprinklers in a specific pen based on those cows' detected stress levels rather than just the overall barn temperature.
So technology can give us a powerful, proactive, early warning system that goes far beyond just looking at a thermometer. But the article includes an important caveat, doesn't it? Something crucial to remember.
That's a critical point the article makes. It notes that while these technologies are promising, the specific thresholds they use to trigger alerts or interventions often need careful consideration.
They aren't always plug and play.
Not necessarily. These thresholds are typically developed under specific experimental conditions using a particular group of animals. The article stresses that further studies are required to truly evaluate and customize these thresholds based on different influencing factors specific to your particular farm.
Like breed, stage of lactation, housing.
Exactly. Things like your breed of cow, their stage of lactation, age, housing type, management practices, and your specific regional climate all play a role.
So you can't necessarily just install a system and assume the default settings are perfect for your cows and your farm.
The article implies it's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all solution right out of the box.
Yeah.
Maximizing its effectiveness requires understanding how those thresholds were derived and potentially working to calibrate or adjust them based on how your specific herd responds under your conditions.
It requires a partnership between the tech and your farm knowledge.
Well put. Yeah.
That adds a necessary piece of nuance to the tech conversation. Now, the article moves into perhaps the most challenging and, for many, uncomfortable part. The reality of farm size, consolidation in the dairy industry, and how heat stress is acting as a systematic force, disadvantaging small farms.
This section of the bovine article is quite stark, yeah. It presents a difficult truth about the structure of the American dairy industry. It argues that heat stress isn't just environmental and biological, it's also economic.
And it hits smaller farms harder.
Disproportionately impacts smaller operations, yes, acting as a driver of consolidation.
And it goes back to that extensive University of Illinois research again to back this up.
Yes, it reiterates a key finding from that large data set we talked about earlier. While the average milk yield loss due to heat stress across the entire U.S. dairy industry was about 1% annually.
Okay, 1% average loss.
That loss wasn't evenly distributed. Smaller farms, defined in the study by herd size, experienced nearly twice this loss on average.
Twice. So around 1.6%.
Around 1.6% annually, yeah. Large operations, by contrast, average closer to that 1% mark.
So smaller farms are losing a significantly larger percentage of their potential production to heat stress compared to larger ones. And the article quantifies that 1.6% loss in a very impactful way.
It puts it in very relatable terms that hit home. A 1.6% annual milk yield loss for a farm is equivalent to operating unpaid for nearly 6 full days out of the year, solely because their cows are overheated.
Wow. Think about running your entire operation, labor, feed, utilities, everything for 6 days and getting zero milk check for it, purely due to heat stress impact.
That's an incredibly visceral way to think about it. 6 days of work, unpaid, every year.
And the core reason for this disparity, according to the article, comes down to money. Capital access.
Precisely. The article identifies the capital barrier as the primary driver of this disparity. Large operations, with their scale and access to financing,
You can justify the big investments.
they can often justify and secure the capital for significant investments in comprehensive, state-of-the-art heat abatement infrastructure. The article mentions investments of $75,000 or even much more being feasible for large dairies.
75 grand or more. That's a lot.
It is. Small farms, on the other hand, often struggle significantly with capital access. They operate on tighter margins, may have less collateral for loans.
And the options aren't always there for them.
Well, the industry currently provides relatively few truly cost-effective, yet highly effective heat abatement solutions that fit within a smaller farm's budget constraints and labor availability.
So larger farms can afford to implement the proactive precision cooling systems that mitigate losses effectively.
Right.
While smaller farms are often stuck with less effective, outdated, or partial solutions because they simply can't access or afford the necessary capital investment.
That's the dynamic the article describes. It's not necessarily that smaller farmers are less skilled or knowledgeable.
It's an economic reality.
They are facing an economic reality where effective heat stress mitigation requires significant upfront capital investment, which is a much higher hurdle for them. The article does suggest one potential avenue for support, though.
It mentions grants or loans.
Yes, the source suggests that targeted grants or low-interest loans could be a possible mechanism to help small farms adopt the kind of advanced management technologies, including cooling infrastructure.
Help them level the playing field a bit.
Allow them to better cope with heat stress and maintain competitiveness. However, this is presented as a potential solution, not something widely available right now.
Right. But the overall picture the article paints is that this cost differential in effectively managing heat stress is a significant, perhaps accelerating force driving consolidation.
And fundamentally reshaping the American dairy landscape.
Yeah. The article poses the challenging question derived from this finding.
It asks, are we as an industry creating a system where only large corporate dairies can truly afford to implement the measures necessary to keep their cows cool and maintain profitability under increasing environmental pressure?
It's presenting that as a finding and a critical question, not taking sides.
Exactly. Highlighting how climate vulnerability and the economics of mitigation are interacting to influence the future structure of dairy farming. It's presented as an observed trend and a question to ponder.
Okay, wow. We've covered a lot of ground from this bovine article.
We really have.
Let's recap quickly. The shockingly low real heat stress threshold at 68 THI.
Not 80. Big difference.
The massive immediate economic cost, that 31K example.
From milk loss, yeah.
The internal physiological damage, acid-base electrolytes.
The whole system gets disrupted.
The uncomfortable truth about how genetics bred for production increase vulnerability.
A double-edged sword.
But then the promise of using genetics for tolerance with genes like SLICK and other markers like TLR4.
Showing we can breed for resilience, too.
The essential and often underinvested role of smart precision cooling.
More than just fans. Doing it right.
The potential of technology for early warning systems, the sensors.
Seeing stress before our eyes, Cam.
And finally, this pressure heat stress puts on small farms, driving consolidation. That's a comprehensive picture of a significant challenge.
It really pulls together all these interconnected pieces, environment, biology, economics, technology, genetics, to paint a full picture of why heat stress is far more than just an inconvenience.
And the article makes it abundantly clear that this isn't a problem that's going away. If anything, it's getting worse.
Right. It reiterates the source's point about climate reality. We are already experiencing, and will continue to experience, an increasing frequency and intensity of heat stress days in many dairy regions.
It mentions some pretty stark projections.
Yeah, specifically projections of 100 to 300 annual heat stress days in key dairy areas by 2050.
100 to 300 days a year. Wow.
And potential milk yield losses increasing by as much as 30% within the next 25 years if mitigation strategies don't improve.
A 30% increase in losses. These are not factors you can ignore or wish away.
Not at all.
The article concludes that building thermal resilience into your operation is no longer optional. It's becoming fundamental.
Fundamental to sustain survival and competitiveness in a changing climate. It's becoming a prerequisite for thriving, not just scraping by.
And the Bovine article wraps up by giving you, the listener, a clear, actionable plan based on the insights it has uncovered. What are those key takeaways, those concrete steps you can take?
The article lists 5 crucial actions that forward-thinking dairy operations should be taking based on the science and economics presented.
Okay, number 1.
1. Challenge your genetic selection strategy. Demand data on heat tolerance from your breeding companies. Don't just look at production. Prioritize incorporating thermoregulation traits like SLICK alongside traditional production traits.
Don't chase production in isolation. Got it. 2.
2. Calculate your thermal losses honestly. Use THI data and your farm records to rigorously quantify your production, reproductive, and health losses that occur during heat stress, even at those lower thresholds like 68, 70 degrees 8 HI. Know your real cost of inaction.
Put a real number on it for your farm. Okay, 3.
3. Invest strategically in precision cooling with proven ROI. Move beyond basic, outdated systems. Implement strategic, high-efficiency fan and sprinkler systems, particularly focusing on precision cycling and placement. Recognize the measurable return through avoided losses.
Invest smart, not just spend more. Number 4.
4. Implement early warning monitoring. Explore and implement sensor technologies that can provide real-time data and alerts, detect thermal stress before visible symptoms appear, and trigger cooling proactively.
Use tech to get ahead of it. And the last one, number 5.
5. Protect genetic investments systematically. This is crucial and often overlooked. Ensure comprehensive heat abatement specifically for dry cows.
Dry cows. Why them specifically? Is this the generational thing?
Yes. Prevent the epigenetic damage that sabotages the lifetime productivity of their future daughters. Dry cow cooling is not a luxury. It's safeguarding your future herd's potential. We didn't dive deep into the mechanism there, but the article details how heat stress on the dry cow affects mammary development, immune function, and metabolic efficiency in the daughter through epigenetic changes.
Wow, so cooling dry cows protects the next generation's performance. That's huge.
Right.
It mentioned reduced mammary growth and issues with prolactin receptors leading to lower production later on.
Exactly, those kinds of long-term programmed impacts. The article quantifies it potentially costing thousands of pounds of milk over a daughter's lifetime just from being heat stressed in utero or as a calf due to mom's stress.
Okay, so those 5 actions are concrete, challenging, but actionable steps derived directly from the insights in this Bovine article.
They really are.
And the article ends with a really powerful forward-looking thought, putting the ultimate choice directly to you, the listener, and framing the consequences clearly.
It asks the critical question every dairy manager who wants to be competitive in the future must answer. Are you proactively building thermoresilience into your operation's fundamental DNA?
Through genetics, cooling, management, tech.
Exactly. Or are you gambling your herd's genetic future and your farm's profitability on increasingly unreliable weather patterns?
While maybe the breeding companies profit from traits that lead to vulnerability if the environment isn't perfect.
That's the provocative implication, yes. Are you investing in managing the vulnerability or just hoping for good weather?
It frames the choice starkly. Invest wisely in comprehensive thermal management now, based on the real science and economics.
Or watch your herd's genetic potential and your farm's hard-earned profits evaporate year after year.
Potentially becoming a casualty of an industry that has, perhaps, been bred for production at the expense of thermal consequences.
The article's final point is really a call to action rooted in foresight. The operations that understand this reality and are mastering comprehensive thermal management today.
They're the ones building herds for the future.
They're the ones building herds that will not just survive, but thrive when others are merely struggling. They are creating a lasting, generational competitive advantage.
And, according to the article, they'll likely be the ones setting milk prices down the road.
Because they can produce more efficiently and reliably under real-world conditions.
That's a powerful and perhaps uncomfortable thought to end on, but one that transforms heat stress management from just a seasonal chore you dread
into a strategic, future-defining decision for your operation.
Are you building a resilient herd for the future? Or are you leaving your genetic investments and your farm's profitability to chance and the weather? Something to really consider after diving into this insightful bovine article.
That's a wrap on today's episode of the Bovine Podcast. If this analysis challenged your thinking about heat stress management, you're not alone. The dairy industry's most expensive myths are the ones hiding in plain sight. Remember, climate change isn't slowing down, and thermal resilience is no longer optional. It's survival. The operations that master heat-tolerant genetics and precision cooling today will be setting milk prices, while others struggle to survive another summer. For the full article with all citations and implementation details, visit www.thebovine.com and search for Beat the Heat. You'll find our complete analysis, plus related articles on cooling strategies, genetic selection, and the economic realities facing modern dairy operations. Don't forget to subscribe to the Bovine Podcast for more industry-challenging insights, and follow us on social media for daily updates that cut through the marketing noise to deliver the truth progressive dairy professionals need. Until next time, keep questioning the conventional wisdom. Your operation's survival may depend on it. This has been the Bovine Podcast. Stay sharp, stay profitable, and stay ahead of the competition.